I found it odd where we in order not to be not to in order for the kids not to understand what we are saying,
we would speak,
tunaongea kama ni Ogekoyo unaongea Gekoyo, kama ni Mujaka unaongea Kijaka.
You know, what is it that in your interactions with Gen 2 Kenyans, you assumed and you turned out to be wrong? DJ Moshaya, let me start with you.
Wow. That's an interesting one. I think I would say picking up the language, say like Swahili or the mother tongue. You assume that they don't know, and you might be saying something with somebody else that you don't want them to hear.
Okay.
And then they like throw in a loose word in there in the same language, and it's pretty clear they understand exactly
what you're saying.
And you may not have gone through the paces of, you've been around this kid for a while, and you may not have gone through the paces maybe of speaking to them in the language, but over time it's like they've been picking this stuff up, but they've been keeping quiet. They don't say anything. The day when you decide that now you want to unleash something, and you might even be saying something about them,
they unload.
Okay. And you're like, hala, you mean this kid? And they're like, yeah, I've been speaking this thing. I understand.
That's quite interesting. It reminds me, like when I started driving, my mother never knew I knew how to drive. So like when I was 17, 18, there was a time when I think there was someone who had died and they needed an extra driver. A couple of my uncles knew, and I was just thrown in. Then my mom was busy insisting, no, he doesn't know how to drive.
In fact, he didn't have a license.
Yeah, you can't give him the car. And he was so mad that so many people knew that I could drive.
Little did she know.
But she didn't know. Yeah. So it's the same thing, I think, with kids, where you're assuming, or maybe sometimes they don't speak the language, but because they're in a household that the language is constantly being spoken, so they can pick out, like some of the things that you say.
And they may even reply. You'll speak to them in that language and they reply in English. There's a way they do some translation in their heads. I don't know how they do it. And boom, they reply in English.
Yes.
So, so you'll be busy having these conversations and they'll be talking to you and replying in English, and you're like, okay,
you're not supposed to know this.
How did this kid pick this stuff up? And it's not like, anybody has specifically been, but so they surprise you. And I think also, kudos to the parents who have the ability to do it, and I'm seeing a lot more with, I'd say, I'm gonna say that the parents who are either my generation or the generation behind me, who actually actively take their kids to Kenya, or even I'd say other Africans, they'll take them to whatever country it is over summer, for at least a month.
Yes.
And they do that religiously, to the point where the kids are even looking for, they're like, hey, look, I want to go see grandma. I want to go see grandpa. I want to go to Kenya. And so, they're looking forward to it. And that time they go, they hang out with their cousins. They play with their cousins. They speak the language. They eat the food. And so they pick up all of those things. So they see the gap that used to be there, in my opinion, looking on from outside.
Yeah.
It's
narrowed.
It's been, really extremely narrowed. And then also the other thing that's happening that I have seen is that there's a lot of literature that's available, that you don't have to take your child to a specific place to learn Swahili. You can actually teach them Swahili from home, and there's a lot of books,
resources,
tutorials, even whether it's YouTube, whether it's actually books that are written, and not only in Swahili. I mean, I found that out recently, where there's this lady, she's Nigerian, but she has a series of books that she has written in a lot. Basically, it's African languages: Hausa, Igbo, Swahili, Eritrean, Yoruba, all sorts of different. And she wants to add more. And so these resources are there. Sometimes parents just have to take themselves just a little bit of a step, and it's right there. Even the community colleges are now offering Swahili. So
I think by Eritrean you meant Tigrinya.
If that's what it is, but all I'm trying to say is that they're there.
Okay.
There's a lot of resources.
Okay, good. Uno Mike,
Yes, sir.
let's come to you. What are some assumptions that you made about second-gen Kenyans, and you realize that you were just wrong at a certain point? And also to the people who are tuned in, give us certain things. Some of you have kids, some of you have family members who are younger. What are some assumptions that you made about them that you turned out to be wrong? And here, Kiza Soze is reminding us that they're teaching Swahili in Colombia now. I think that was in response to my comment about the Colombian soccer team.
We
So
can talk about that
that's very
later.
good, yeah. And they also have a black female vice president.
Yes, they
so that's
do.
also very interesting. But Uno Mike, back to you. You have nephews, nieces. You guys have a clan here. Yeah, you have a whole clan.
I think
A whole lot of gofus.
Yeah.
I think my assumption had always been that, they are Kenyan.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Just by the virtue of your Kenyan parents, you're
Yeah.
Kenyan.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And by being Kenyan, then, language, you're thinking everything has to be, it's like Kenyan, It's for me, it was automatic, kama kuna nyama choma,
Yeah.
wanachoma. Kama ni kukanda chapo, mademu watasaidia, wanaume,
Yeah. The traditional
the
roles. Yeah.
traditional roles, right? And it dawned on me when, like Omosh was saying, how I found it odd where we, in order for the kids not to understand what we are saying,
We would speak.
tunaongea kama ni Ogekoyo unaongea Gekoyo, kama
Yeah.
ni Mujaka unaongea Kijaka. And that troubled me for some while, because I'm like, if we really want them, if they're really Kenyan, we should be putting the effort
To teach them.
to teach them
And
Yeah.
encourage.
and encourage.
Yeah.
And I've given examples of this. I'm coming from Jobo, I'm taking the red line, Nadondoka Silver Spring. There's some kids, probably teenagers, I'm gonna say, just walking. Maze, it's like yo, what? Then it's like one receives a call, and there's a code switch, and they are speaking that, is it Amharic or whatever?
Tigrinya. Yeah.
Wanaongea wanakoroga,
Yeah.
kukoroga kabisa. And I'm like, maybe we need to start
Okay.
teaching. Like,
Yes.
so like now for me, I do recall a friend of mine, his kids, before they relocated to Kenya, his kids, when they entered the house, it was strictly Kikuyu, Kiswahili.
Okay.
There was no English.
That's very good.
Strictly.
Yeah.
And
And
this
the
is-
kids grew up knowing that.
Yes, and we're
Okay.
talking about, we're not talking about 15, 16. We're talking about 3, 4, 5. Now, when speech now becomes part of their, and it's not that they just started at 8.
Mm-hmm.
If him and his wife, they would speak. So it was a mission that the parents, that they decided that they would be speaking Kikuyu,
Yeah.
such that even the kids themselves, they grow up learning that.
Okay.
Right? They'd have videos and music videos, Kikuyu, teaching Kikuyu, how to count, stuff like that.
Yeah.
And that for me was amazing. And we're talking about maybe 16 years ago, 15.
Okay.
So the kids by now already, I think, hopefully they're
They're comfortable.
So those are some of the things that, like, I think the major one for me was, automatically thinking, just because they've been born of Kenyan
Yeah.
parents,
Mm-hmm.
they are automatically Kenyan.
Yes.
But shock on me.
yes.
Shock on me.
Oh,
Okay.
the kids will tell
All right.
you. They'll
Yeah.
tell you themselves in 6.8 seconds, I'm American.
Yeah.
And you're over there trying to have a whole argument with them about the way they're Kenyan. They're like, and you're like, your father is Kenyan, so you're from Kenya. That's how we do.
Yeah.
Like, no, I'm American.
Yeah, and you see, those are interesting things. We are seeing identity issues coming up, language issues coming up. But interestingly, for me, like I did have a lot of assumptions, but one of the biggest ones, came last week when I was talking to Annette about the show. And Annette, you mentioned to me that when we came here as adults, we were leaders because we were the majority at that time. So we were already leaders in our 20s. We were already leaders in our 20s, and we were taking control of stuff. Ikiwa kama ni mambo ya mazishi, if it's events we're organizing, if it's ATL, if it's Dallas, we were in control of everything in our 20s. But what's happening right now within the Kenyan community, it's kind of like we grew with that leadership and did not like relinquish it to the younger generation. So now you have this new generation that are in their 20s, but like everything that's Kenyan related, it's still kind of led by people who are first generation Kenyans.
That's very true.
And when you look at even a lot of different committees, be it like funeral committees, or be it committees, or be it organizations, like that work to get Kenyans funeral insurance.
Benevolence,
when you look at the lineup,
SAPOS,
there's this group that's consistently missing in action, and that's something that I had never paid attention to. It had never come to my mind. We talked about the baton not being passed.
Yeah.
So talk to us about that and your experience with this.
Yes, I think one of the things that really, really triggers me personally is the term youth, because it's used very ambiguously. And for the first generation that were here when they were their 20s, and they were in their 20s in the 90s, and they're now, and they're nearing retirement age or retired, they use that word as a blanket term for anyone who is younger than them. And that's very problematic, because youth is supposed to specifically signify a certain group. Typically in the American culture, it's, teenagers, and then maybe up until you graduate college.
In Kenya, it's up to 36.
That's a very interesting.
Yes.
That is,
when they talk about youth fund, it's up to 36.
So for the record, anyone who's listening, I'm still a youth according to that standard.
Who is a youth? Say it again, Annette.
Until 36.
That's the Kenyan standard. But what did you say? What's a youth in America?
According to Kenyan standards, I have not reached. But according to American standards, we're talking about teenagers, and we're talking about up until.
You're past the
I have not passed, sir.
According to American standards, you're past the
point. According to American standards, I've passed, and so now what the problem now becomes is the language that we use dictates how we behave. If we believe these people are youths, meaning that they're young and therefore are incapable in certain ways, and or they lack information or knowledge in certain ways, and they cannot contribute in a way that is significant. And that actually is not true. What I have experienced in the times where there have been committees for people who, now unfortunately my peers are also passing, okay, people in their 20s and their 30s, we're having that experience.
Yes.
Now our community is
and
large enough that it's happening frequently enough, right? It's healthcare issues,
scary.
It can be mental health issues, it can be
accidents,
it could be whatever the case may be, right? So in the times where I've had a peer of mine, a friend of mine who's passed, their parents and their friends have taken over the entire that entire process, which one doesn't give us the opportunity to learn what the process is like, and two doesn't give us an opportunity to grieve in a way that they were able to grieve when it was their turn when they were young adults, right? So they're robbing us of something that they had themselves.